for socio-economic transformation. My name is Martin Gordon Mubanjizi, a data scientist at UN Global Pulse, and I'll be moderating this webinar. With us today is a panel of experts, and we shall be discussing responsible data sharing, building trust in the Ugandan data ecosystem. Just a small background about the webinar. So the Ministry of ICT and National Guidance, with collaboration with UN Global Pulse Kampala, and working closely with several other stakeholders, have embarked on work to produce a policy instrument that would help Uganda maximize the value of data for socio-economic transformation. To achieve this, there is need to be sustainably. Uganda needs to sustainably maximize the data dividends by unlocking safe and responsible data sharing within government, government to business, business to business, but also business to government. However, achieving this requires building trust in the data ecosystem, and in turn, we believe this is going to increase the demand for data. So with this short background, I would like to take us to our panelists. I would like us to take us to our panelists. So today, I'll have Becca Balikuja, Manager, Licensing and Legal Affairs, Personal Data Protection Office, Uganda; Catherine Kafumbe, Deputy Country Director and Data Protection Officer, Uganda; Philip Isaka, Program Manager at Policy; Bernard Sabiti, Senior Engagement and Partnership Manager at Development Initiatives; and Nelly Elongot, Head of Compliance, Bank of Africa. So, yeah, Bank of Africa. So basically, this is the panel that we have today, and I'll be posing some questions to them, so that we continue to understand the topic of discussion, our topic of discussion today. So feel free to send in your names and organization in the chat, or you could actually change your name to indicate maybe your first name and an underscore organization, such that we know the people that are with us today in this webinar. And encourage people to send in questions as the discussion goes on, such that we are able to make this webinar interactive. So allow me to introduce my first panelist. This is Becca Balikuja, Manager, Licensing and Legal Affairs. But Becca Balikuja is a seasoned lawyer with an extensive background in compliance and regulatory matters within the information technology sector. He currently the Personal Data Protection Office and heads the Legal Affairs and Compliance Department. His role is responsible for leading the regulatory compliance efforts of the Personal Data Protection Office and overseeing investigations of potential violations of protection, data privacy, monitoring adherence to the Act by the organizations and individuals, and collaborating with data protection authorities to ensure a cohesive and effective approach of regulation. So Becca With that short intro, I'll go to, I'll ask Becca some questions. I'll ask Becca the first question. So Becca, before we dive into the topic today, could you briefly share with us progress made by the Personal Data Protection Office in the last 1 year, and maybe what are you doing to ensure that persons and entities appreciate the need for data privacy compliance? Becca, over to you.
Thank you, Martin. Good morning to you all, fellow panelists and participants. I'll briefly turn on my video. Hopefully you'll be able to see me. Are you able to see me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, that is my true likeness. I will now turn off my video and go straight to the discussion. So the progress that we've done, we've been able to achieve in the last about 1.5 years we've been in operation, is that one, we started with awareness. You know, a number of people are not aware of the law. Some people would ask you, does this law cover also data collected by companies? Then you'd have to rectify that it's only about individuals. Or does it talk about also data, you know, the MBs that people use, internet? So the awareness, so far we've conducted over 160 awareness sessions, both in government, private sectors, schools, and even civil society. But we've also developed toolkits to enable entities comply with the law, assess their level of compliance, and then also registered. We've registered as of today over 1,300 organizations, both private and public sector, that collect and process data of people resident in Uganda. We've also conducted audits. We've audited over 10 companies. And then we've also been resolving complaints. The complaints are increasing by the day. As of today, we're at over 3,500. So briefly, that's what we've been able to do. How we've been able to assist organizations comply with the law. One, we noted that to be able to properly assist these organizations, you need to know who their data protection officers are. So with this, we conducted trainings. We've had one with MasterCard where we identified DPOs that we trained on conducting data protection impact assessments and also implementing a cybersecurity program. But then the other is that we have monthly webinars. So the other level of compliance is some of the complaints that we've received where we see that there is a particular trend about mishandling of data. So we engage the regulators, the specific sector regulators, to guide them on how this can be addressed so that it can be standardized in addressing the problem. And lastly, compliance. Also, it cannot just be about the carrot, you know, giving people best practices, what can be done. There should also be the stick. Because the stick is needed, one, definitely is to deter behavior of mishandling of data, but also most importantly, is that, you know, those that have invested in being compliant with the law, if they see that non-compliance is not penalized, then it can discourage further compliance. So we've already started instituting criminal proceedings against directors, particular employees that have not complied with the law, so that we take them to present them before courts of law. So briefly, that's my discussion. Over to you, Martin.
Martin, I think you're muted.
Yeah, so let me introduce the second panelist. And our second panelist is Catherine Tulina Kafumbe, who is the Deputy Director and Data Protection Officer, Safe Border. And she is a seasoned professional with over 12 years experience in customer success field. She currently serves as the deputy director at Safe Border, and she's responsible for the overall operations of the company. Catherine has a wealth of experience in telecommunications, customer service industry, having previously worked at Airtel. She has worked at IBM, and she has worked at Smile. In her current role at Safe Border, she also serves as the data protection officer, ensuring compliance with the data privacy and data protection guidelines as stipulated by the regulators. Catherine, maybe you would also want to know, we have heard Baker talk about how they are supporting organizations to be compliant with the data privacy regulation. Would you also tell us what Safe Border does to comply with this law? And then how do you think this translates into building trust in your customers? Over to you, Catherine.
Thank you very much, Martin, and good morning, everyone. Happy to be here this morning. Safe Border, first of all, in order to thinking about compliance with data protection, for us, it speaks to our need to be compliant with the registration at the Personal Data Protection Office. So we have ensured that, first of all, we are fully registered and we are bound to comply to the Data Protection and Privacy Act as guided. As Becca indicated, he's organized so many trainings last year. Honestly, every month we almost had a training, and we have put in place measures to ensure that the Data Protection Office is present and attending these trainings and always growing our knowledge in this space. So on top of that, as indicated, Safe Border found it very important that a data protection officer is appointed, and not just appointed, but sitting at the senior leadership level. This way, there's full accountability and knowledge at the senior leadership level on what data protection and compliance is about. And then we ensure that this is built across the team. So the Data Protection Office works together with the business compliance manager and an internal team that manages the different sections, because it's a big organization. So the internal team then takes care of making sure that a lot of awareness is done to the staff to make sure that the ethos of data protection and privacy are part of us, and also even the internal policies. These have been updated to take care of the accountability requirement and to build the culture of change towards data protection. So when we look at the customers, we have made sure that they have to them available the data privacy policy, and they can view what we stand for and how we use their data, how we view their data. So, and then maybe to answer on the space of how we ensure privacy. Internally, we do have internal data access levels and controls in place. So you will only get access to data that you need to be able to execute a service to our customer, and not beyond that. And this is managed at a high level and allocated based on need with reviews internally. Then if you look at people like our drivers, we provide for an acceptable usage policy where they need to review, they accept every time they have to sign into the app, so that they're constantly aware on what is happening. So when we look at their onboarding process, we are talking to them every time, training them on what data privacy is, what they should, what they are privy to, what they can do with it, what they can't do about it. And they also we'll also make sure that periodically we do have what we call internally service weeks. We continue having conversations around this for emphasis. And of course, maybe to speak to the issue of trust. When we look at the trust to the customer must understand that all the information about them, they can access it. And we also provide to them access to the privacy policy. If they are logging into the app, before they access the app, they have to refer to the terms and conditions. They have to look at the privacy policy, review, accept, then they can accept the service. One important aspect for you to use the Safe Border app in everything you do is location. And they have to accept, allow, or deny, and it is explained to them why it's important, because it is necessary for them to be mapped maybe to a user or something. So that way we are able to try and build trust, and it's an ongoing journey. Thank you, Martin. Over to you.
Thank you, Catherine, for that. And maybe let's go to Bernard Sabiti. So just to introduce Bernard Sabiti to us. So Bernard has over 10 years experience as a researcher and public policy analyst, exploring the intersection of Africa's data revolution and the complex realities of its development trajectory. He's currently a senior engagement and partnership manager at Development Initiatives, an independent international organization that focuses on putting data-driven decision-making at the heart of poverty reduction and sustainable development. He's based in Kampala, from where he supports Development Initiatives Africa regional efforts, privileging key partnerships with government and other stakeholders to increase access to and use of development data. So, Bernard, I would like to start. I would like to ask you a question as a person who, as a data subject, who contributes data to, to Safe Border, to MTNs and the telecoms and the likes and the banks. So, in your individual capacity, why is trust important in a data ecosystem like Uganda, and what can data collectors do to win trust for your data?
Thank you, Martin. Good morning, everyone. So for me, as a person, a subject who contributes data to a company, or who is a source of data to a company, my first instinct, I think, when I'm giving out data to a company, to a bank, to a school, or to a government agency, the expectation is that such an agency will be a good steward of my data, that they will be good guarantors of my privacy and confidentiality, and that the data that I'm giving them is going to be used for the purposes that they have made clear to me. I think, given the explosion in digital platforms, the reality we are living with today, it's becoming increasingly difficult that this trust is automatically guaranteed. And I think it is up to the people or the companies and organizations that hold individual data to be aware that they now have enormous power in this information age, that they have responsibility to make sure that they safeguard people's information, and also that they have robust benchmarks and tools to protect individuals' data. Unfortunately, it looks to me that a lot of these organizations or people that work in them, some of them don't really understand the importance of this. Because of how fast the digital and data revolution has happened, everybody's playing catch up, and we don't seem to really understand that there is enormous power in holding people's information. There are several examples one can give in Uganda, I think, where organizations have not used the individual data of their clients well. Whether it's the passport office the other day publishing in newspapers very private information of people's passports, asking them to come and pick them, or the police force publishing in the newspapers as well details of people's vehicles and licenses, and those who allegedly have committed traffic offenses. I think some of this may look subtle and innocent for some of them because there is still a lot of work to be done on sensitization. I think the Office for Data Protection is doing a great job at that. But personally, I think we have a long way to go in terms of appreciation of the importance of the privacy and safeguarding people's private data. So for me as a person who has given data and information to a third party, I expect them to have strong benchmarks to protect that data. And as I have said, unfortunately, there's no guarantee really that everyone that you give data to is going to take responsibility for it. I think as an ecosystem, we need to do much more to make sure that people are aware and that they appreciate the importance of privacy. Thank you.
Bernard, for that. At least we have heard from a data subject. Now let's go to Deli Elengot, who works with Bank of Africa as head of compliance. And we want to basically, Nelly has over 15 years of banking experience. She joined Bank of Africa in 2002 as a banking officer, and she has gone through the various ranks in the bank and is currently the head of compliance. She holds a Bachelor's of Arts with education degree from Makerere University, a master's in business administration from Makerere University Business School, and a Bachelor's of Law degree from Makerere University. But she also heads the committee on compliance at the Uganda Bankers Association. And so, Nelly, you're welcome to this panel. And I would want you to tell us. So, in Bernard's submission, he said that data has a lot of power, and I want to know from the banking perspective what value do you guys generate from data, and why is data important in the banking sector?
Thank you, Bernard. Thank you, Martin, and previous speakers. Good morning to everybody on the call. In terms of data and the value that is generated in the banking industry, I would consider like the total value of accounts that we have and the total numbers and values. So presently, we have about 19 million accounts industry-wide, with over trillions of shillings on these accounts. If you look at mobile money, there are about 34 million registered users, and these are moving about 14 trillion shillings on a monthly basis. So that can really give an estimate of the value of the data that is contained and the number of customers that are involved. And if there's a breach, the kind of impact that it would have to the industry. And also what is key to note is that these numbers are growing month on month. The number of accounts, number of users, and even the values, the amounts that are being kept on the respective accounts is increasing month on month, which reflects the confidence that the public has in the respective financial services and the financial industry. So that is how I would look at the value of data in the banking industry at large. Thank you.
Thanks, Nelly. Could you also talk about how? Okay, maybe this will come in the next question. Let's first go to Philip. So our next panelist is Philip. And Philip Ayazika is a program manager at Policy with over 5 years experience in designing, implementing data and technology blended interventions. He specializes in supporting human rights defenders and civil society organizations to integrate data and digital technologies into development projects and creating an inclusive and safe digital ecosystem. He leads the Digital Human Rights Lab at Policy, and he has initiated several initiatives to promote ethical data use and share data platforms to improve decision making and analytical capacity in the various sectors. So, Phil, my question to you is, could you tell us a little bit on how we can build this trust in the data ecosystem in Uganda?
Thank you so much, Martin, and thank you so much everyone else that has made time to join us in this conversation. I think the topic of building trust is an interesting one because I think, as Bernard mentioned, that we operate in an ecosystem where distrust is by default. So I think this is an interesting topic. But I think first and foremost, I want to say that there are no absolutes when it comes to trust. And this is an issue that even the so-called developed countries that we, as we call them, still grapple with, even when they have structures and frameworks that are comprehensive. One morning you wake up to the case of the overturning of the Roe versus Wade case, and all of a sudden there are all these new revelations about how certain big tech companies are eroding people's personal data privacy. But for me, I think this paints a picture of what is going on globally, even in Uganda, because we would be shocked and we would have, I think, would have an endless legal battles if we decided to lift the veil on some of the most loved and trusted, trusted in quotes, the most trusted companies that we have in Uganda here that have amassed, big data over the years on how they process, handle and use this data. But I think here is the good news that while we haven't gotten where we want to go in terms of a trustable data ecosystem, I think we must acknowledge that we have come a long way in as much as establishing trust in the ecosystem goes. We are no longer in a crisis as it used to be, I think. Several years ago, and not very long ago, I think about 2 years ago, even during the COVID times, when we had very scary orders being passed, giving orders to border driver riders, giving powers to barbers, the people that cut our hair, to collect personal identifying information, even in an environment where there was no structure. But now seeing that we have, frameworks being put in place, we have the Personal Data Protection Office, and I want to applaud you, that team, Baker, you're doing an amazing work. I think we are making progress. So onto the question on how do we build a trustable, data ecosystem in Uganda? I think the quick response for me to that question would be acting and correcting mistakes. It's as simple as that, and this means, even if it means issuing penalties in cases where alternative means have failed, where people keep, misusing people's personal data that they possess, where we see, ministries, departments, and agencies continue to, publish personal identifying information. I think we need to get to a point where we quickly act and correct these mistakes when they happen. And like I've said, issuing penalties, if necessary, should be also one way we explore. For me, I think plainly this is how you build a trustable ecosystem, because trust takes all players in the ecosystem, like we mentioned them, the government, the civil society, even the citizenry, who are the biggest data stakeholders. It takes them knowing that there's actually a system that works. And response for me is when, an MDA, for example, like Bernard said, when the immigration wakes up and publishes personal identifying information about people's passports on their website, and then, the Personal Data Protection Office comes up and tells them to pull it down, and then they go ahead and be able to, do some trainings with them and guide them as need be. Apart from that, I think we still also have a lot of work to do when it comes to sharpening the law and identifying the missing the gaps that might exist when it comes to having clear and transparent data governance models. Also, it goes without saying that we must increase our investment in technology and infrastructure. Does advanced technology guarantee safety and later trust? Maybe not, maybe yes, but I think, like Nelly will tell you that I think the banking sector provides us the best practices when it comes to investment in technology and infrastructure. So I think that's the way to go. And of course, I would say continuous engagement of all stakeholders in the field. For me, I foresee a time where we have even, for example, the National Data Protection Day, where we have the various stakeholders come together and talk about where have we come from in terms of data protection, where have we come from in terms of having a trustable data ecosystem. So for me, plainly, that is what it is when it comes to building a trustable data ecosystem. Thank you, Mike.
Thanks, Philip, for that. And yeah, so you've really raised pertinent issues around building trust. And of course, one of the things that is important, like you've said, is actually having the data protection regulation that we already have in Uganda, and so that is the first step. And of course, awareness creation is also important, as you've said. So allow me to go back to Catherine. And so Catherine, when I was browsing through the internet, I found an article online on the online independent news website. And this article was posted on January 28th, 2019. And it stated that Safe Border was targeting around 30,000 riders in 2019. But of course, I know that COVID might have disrupted this target. But I would be interested in knowing how many riders Safe Border currently has. Maybe just a quick number, Catherine.
Martin, you're close in terms of range. We are approximately 30,000 riders.
Wow. That is for a data scientist like me, who understands the value of data. That's really amazing, because this is a very rich data set, in both time and space, that could be reused for, say, urban design and planning, including mapping road networks, understanding road congestion and conditions. So maybe, if I may ask, what steps would you take to respond to a data sharing request for a urban planning project? If Safe Border received such a request, what steps would Safe Border take?
Thank you, Martin. It's a very interesting question, and I see how the urban city planners would end up coming to Safe Border for such data requests. However, maybe speaking to what Bernard highlighted earlier, there are no guarantees that everybody appreciates privacy and customer data and its privacy. So I think a couple of things would need to be done before we can be able to see whether or not this data can be shared. Because obviously the expectation would be that the requester, which in this case would probably be a government office, should be compliant to the Data Protection and Privacy Act in themselves, for a start. And we would need to look at the legality of the data they're asking for. So do some checks and understand if whatever they're asking for is real and it is legal. And because of the uniqueness of this data, we would need to seek also, I think, guidance, clearance from the Personal Data Protection Office on this, and then conduct a data impact assessment to understand what the request is and how it will impact the different people, any impact on the subjects and all the different parties within it, which will inform how we move forward then with the request. So in our privacy policy, we do provide for the use of data for purposes of analytics. But in this case, we need to be able to update as well our privacy policy to include that requester. And then upon verification of the purpose, we will also ensure that at the point, if we are green and we are clear that the request is valid, it's legal, then we will need to ensure that any data that has to be shared is anonymized, that no personal data of the subject is given in this case, because it's not necessary. They probably just want to see the number of the amount of traffic that is on a particular route so they can plan for it. So if maybe we have 5,000 trips that are happening between route X and route Y, that is all they need to determine their planning activity, and that is all they should be able to receive. And before enforcement or disclosure of the data, would have to have a confidentiality agreement that would be signed between both parties, and then maybe we could be able to proceed to the providing them the data. So that's in a nutshell. That would be the detailed but summarized process that would have to go through if we have to share that data. And the response is actually if we have to share the data, not that we will have to share the data. Thank you.
Wow, Catherine, that is interesting that you have actually SEPCOD has actually thought through all these stages, and it is very interesting that you're not saying data cannot be shared, but you're saying that actually measures can be taken to ensure that people's privacy is protected, and then you could be able to share anonymized or even aggregated or even just insights for urban planning. And that is, I think, very good. But maybe going back to Becca. So last week, I was in a meeting and one of the participants expressed fear that the Data Protection and Privacy Act has made data sharing even harder than before. And so it appears that some people feel that the data protection, the data privacy compliance stifles data sharing and hence affecting innovation in Uganda. So Becca, what is your reaction to this? And also, I would like to know what support the Personal Data Protection Office offers to entities in preparing to share data for reuse. Becca, over to you.
Sorry, Martin, a bit of a network issue. Can you repeat that?
Okay, so I was saying that last week in the meeting, one of the participants expressed fear that the Data Protection and Privacy Act has made data sharing even harder than before. So it appears that some people feel that data privacy compliance stifles data sharing, and hence is affecting innovation, will be affecting innovation in Uganda. So what is your reaction to this? And then you can also tell us what support the Personal Data Protection Office can offer to entities preparing to share data for reuse.
Thank you, Martin. Now, of course, usually most people think or believe that having a Data Protection and Privacy Act in place, it will stop you from sharing or reusing data already collected. But data protection, it's already comes from the angle of data governance. regardless of whether it's personal data. So when you collect data, the first question is, what's the purpose? Why did you collect it? If your government, was it to provide a service? If your business such as Safe Border, sorry, Kathy, to use this example, was it to have a person download the app so that the rider can locate you and provide you with a service? So originally there is that purpose. But when you talk about reuse or sharing with another party, so that means there is possibly a person who is not what we call the data collector, who originally collected the information, being given to another person. So that purpose is there. Data protection, the laws, what it's saying, that before you go ahead and reuse this information, whether as the person that originally collected it or sharing it with another person, first consider if, let me say, I downloaded an application to access a service, but then my information is going to be shared for something which is not even in any way related, then clearly you should rethink and look at the law that you should actually obtain the person's consent. Now, in most instances, most especially around reuse, if an entity originally collected the information and maybe they would like to communicate with you, provide marketing services, they can do so, but of course, giving you an option to opt out. Now, if it's to another party, let's say for statistics purposes or research related aspects, now the law says that yes, you can go ahead and share such information. However, it should be done in compliance with other principles within the law. What are these principles? One, minimum information should be shared. The information shouldn't be identifying individuals who are originally collected from, so it could be aggregated data. But then also, most importantly, all this starts from transparency. So at the point of collection, the individual, what we call a privacy notice, other people call it a disclosure statement or a policy, let people know that we are collecting this information with you, rather from you, but we may share it with maybe researchers, may share it so that a person is not shocked to hear that their information was not shared. And to make this very easy for a person to know, we always advise that you use what is called a two-layered notice. That we know a privacy notice, policy, or disclosure could be long, but you can break it down, whereby those sections which could shock a person, such as sharing, they should be highlighted. So I've downloaded an application, I'm signing a form, a contract, or even I've called and participating into rather part of a program. Let a person know we'll be collecting this information, but it may be shared with this particular company to help us understand your behavior for statistics purposes. It may be shared with researchers. We usually have researchers, academic researchers, people from researching for different businesses, but however, it cannot be traced back to you so that a person knows. Now, the other layer of the notice should provide a person the link, a number to call, or where to locate the full detailed policy. So that way, the law does not stop resharing as long as you follow those principles. You know, most people think that when you talk of data protection, it says right away, do not reshare. Of course, look at the principles and the guidance within the law. If you find that even what you're doing could actually cause discomfort to the person, that's where conducting a data protection impact assessment comes in to help you mitigate these risks. So how we are helping entities, you know, to ensure resharing is done in the right way, we always say first register. Now, you may think that this is something that I've just placed there. You know, if you're out there collecting data, resharing it, and we don't know who you are, we can't help you. So if you know who your data protection officer is, you know, gradually we are coming up with a sector-specific training, so we can always call on them and give them further guidance. The other route that we are taking is developing guidance notes. And then also people send us emails, write letters, so we give them the guidance. But starting with the law, the provisions are very clear on sharing. But I also need to emphasize, please do not reshare or reuse information if you did not include it in your privacy notice. Otherwise, from the word go, that will be unlawful. But actually, there are so many ways you can do it and innovate, because with data, you know, you can find so much value as long as you comply with the law. Thank you, Martin. Over to you.
Thanks, Baker, for that. So now it is clear, I think, to everyone in the audience that the Data Protection and Privacy Act is not there to stop people from sharing data, but there are mechanisms through which data can actually be shared for reuse. And as UN Global Pulse, of course, we're interested in reusing data for social good. So, of course, the issue like of urban planning would actually be something for that will have social impact. So that is things that we encourage. Maybe in the interest of time, Philip, for this question, try to be as brief as possible. Philip, you could maybe share with us some best practices around data sharing that entities in Uganda can actually adopt to ensure responsible data sharing. Thanks, Philip.
Thank you so much, Martin. I think the best practices speak for themselves, and I think most of the speakers have already talked about them. One would be establishing clear guidelines and policies for data sharing that clearly outline the terms and conditions under which, for one, data is being shared, including what data can be shared, because not every data can be shared. And I'm glad someone from SafeCode already talks about anonymizing, because data sharing in itself wouldn't be a bad thing, because again, that's what we're talking about, responsible data sharing. But what data can be shared, who can access it, and how can it be, how can it be used? And of course, the need to include in these clear guidelines the provisions for protecting the security and privacy of the data, as well as guidelines for handling disputes. For example, yesterday, Ms. Alisa Libatesa talked about developing alternative dispute mechanisms in times like now, where we have issues with digital lending, digital lenders, people that are being complained about. So I think that's one. And of course, it goes without saying, protecting sensitive data, using tools like encryption, secure transfer protocols, clearly defining roles and responsibilities in the process of transfer of data. So what is the role of the data provider? What is the role of the data user? And just making sure that through this process, each and every person plugs in and they play a role. This is very key, because I think during the time where truck drivers were being complained about during the COVID time, the ESC came up and launched the system. And then we know that all countries within the ESC signed an agreement of sorts. But when we're doing our research, we didn't see any agreement that was open to the public. So one of the other best practices is openness. So opening up these agreements and data sharing agreements to the public to actually see them, because again, we're saying the public is the main stakeholder when it comes to data. So it's important that they look at these agreements, that they're in their loop, and that they hold the various players accountable. So thank you so much, Gordon. Briefly, that is it.
Yeah, thanks, Philip, for that. I think that is a very important thing, because we know that there might be sometimes data sharing, but some people may fear to open up to actually talk about this. But I think it's good to be open about any data sharing that is happening, because then also that translates into building trust in the data subjects, if it's clear what steps are taken in actually sharing the data that ensure that their privacy is protected, and also for people to know that actually it's beneficial for data to be shared. So now I want to go to Nelly, and I understand that data sharing in the banking sector is so mature, and the rest of the sectors in Uganda could actually learn from you. Could you share with us examples of the different kinds of responsible data sharing in the banking sector? Tell us what is shared, how, for what, and when, such that we were able to understand and learn from you.
Thank you, Martin. Yes, indeed, there's a lot of data sharing that takes place in the banking industry. Some of this data information sharing is required by law. For example, under credit reference, you'll find that borrower information is shared. mainly really to protect the depositors' money that is being advanced to the borrowers. We'll share information with the Bank of Uganda, the Financial Intelligence Authority, as required by law, for those regulators to be able to undertake their respective mandates. Uganda Revenue Authority, a number of regulators with whom information is shared. Other than regulators, data is also shared with different, because many financial institutions are partnering with different service providers to offer services. For example, if you look at international payments, you'll find that there are data processors at various levels with whom certain information has to be shared for that service to be delivered, even to ensure that maybe your money is not paid to the wrong person. So information has to be shared between certain service providers or data processors to facilitate payments. Now we have agents on board. So there are a number of partners that banks are partnering with. Also, data is shared. Some banks have entered into outsourcing arrangements in order to harness operational efficiencies. For example, you'll find that they are partnered with debt collectors, valuation companies, surveyors, check production companies, in order to really give customers services that perhaps they would not efficiently do or provide as a bank. So yes, information is shared, but what is being done to ensure that this information is shared responsibly? A number of initiatives are being undertaken by the banks. One is to ensure that information is shared over safe and secure platforms. So most of the regulators will have secure data exchange platforms to facilitate that information sharing where required by law. Then also banks are subjected to periodic self-assessments of their security safeguards. These are both internal, but also external by external auditors who will come and assess, how are your systems still efficient? Are they adequate? Are there gaps that need to be closed? And of course, reports are produced and any issues therein are addressed. So that is one of the ways to ensure that there's responsible sharing that is happening. Then also where data sharing is not required by law, then the consent of the data subjects has to be obtained. And also data subjects are usually informed of why the information is being collected, what is going to be collected, why it is being collected, and with whom it is going to be shared with. That is normally disclosed by most of the financial institutions. Then many institutions will have complaint management systems in place to ensure that any customers or data subjects can complain in case they are not satisfied or in case something has gone wrong, and those complaints will be investigated. And like one of the speakers said earlier, if the staff are culpable, then disciplinary measures are usually taken against those staff. Then in addition, there's training that happens continuously in most of the financial institutions to ensure that each staff member is aware of their obligations and of the requirement not to disclose, to unauthorized data to any unauthorized persons. And lastly, I think there's also a number of agreements in place with the different players. Like I said, that there are a number of service providers or data processors that banks are partnering with. So usually there are service level agreements that contain clauses that require that each, the parties adhere to the confidentiality and integrity of data. Then there are also non-disclosure agreements, and things like that. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Nelly, for that. And I think those are a lot of best practices that we can actually be used by other sectors. And we know that some other sectors don't have a lot of data sharing, but I think it is important for their operation. So thanks for that. I know we are running out of time. We wanted to have some time for questions. So I would maybe request that that the participants allow us to go over by maybe 10 minutes to allow us be able to complete with the questions and allow 10 minutes for questions and answers. I've seen there are some questions that have come into the question and answer. There are some in the chat, and we would like at least to our panelists to respond to them. But before we go to the question and answer, which we shall do in the 10 minutes over time, over the time that we had planned. Let me first go back to Bernard and ask him. So Bernard is as a user of data in the data ecosystem. So basically, as a staff of development initiatives, who reuses data shared from other data collectors. What does trust mean to you?
Thank you, Martin. At development initiatives, I would say, because we are researchers and analysts, we are among the biggest users of data here in Uganda. And for us, of course, to trust the data that we use in our analysis, we have to be convinced and have confidence that the data that we are working with, first of all, that it was professionally corrected using the right standards. And we always try to make sure that we are using legitimate sources of data. What do I mean by this? As I said in my first remarks, the data revolution has meant that there are now so many sources of data or potential sources of data. Many years ago, the UN Statistical Division issued a document on the principles of official statistics in 1994, actually. By that time, most producers of data were government statistics agencies. In our case, that would be the Uganda Bureau of Statistics. At development initiatives, we use a lot of UBOS data because it is the official statistics agency. But the data revolution has meant that there are other producers of data. They are producers of administrative data. There is big data, satellites, and all that. And so it means that national statistics agencies are no longer the only legitimate sources of data. And because of this proliferation in the data and digital platforms, there is a challenge there whereby the quality and standards sometimes are very hard to determine. Because, for example, we have people these days, anyone with a phone is a potential data producer. We have citizen journalists, we have citizen-generated data. This new information age has even created the new careers and jobs that didn't exist a few years ago. We have content creators and YouTubers, and these are words that didn't even exist just a few years ago. So all these put out a lot of content out there, a lot of data and a lot of information. So it becomes a challenge as a data user to know what to pick and from where. And this proliferation has also given a lot of power to big tech companies and all these organizations that hold power. So as users of data, it is upon us to make sure that the data we are using actually at least follows basic standards of data production. And trust is actually not only relevant during production of data. Trust is important through the whole data value chain, from the time the data is produced to the time it is analyzed, to to the time it is disseminated, published, and used and reused. There has to be standards across that whole chain that build confidence in the legitimacy of that data. So for me and for us as development initiatives, we make sure that the data that we are using at least meets the most of those standards, because that also has influence on how our analysis is trusted. Because if you use data that whose sources are not clear and which cannot be proved, whose legitimacy cannot be proved, then you also create doubt on the product that you have produced, whether it's a research paper or something. And in this age of fake news and disinformation, trust is even more important than ever, because it's very, very difficult to tell what is legit and what is not these days. So when we appreciate the advantages this revolution has brought of democratizing the data ecosystem, where everyone almost has access and has the ability to produce information, we have to be aware of the risks that have come from this explosion in these platforms. There has to remain some sort of quality assurance, especially if you are to be respected as a responsible user of data. And at DI, we try to follow this. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Bernard. And you've brought up issues of standardization. You've brought up issues of quality. And of course, in your submission, you also indicated that originally national statistics offices were, had their conventional methods of collecting data, but there is a move to seeing how big data can also be harnessed for social for official statistics, which is interesting. There is actually the UN Statistics Office. Statistics Office has workshops around big data for official statistics, and they also explain how, for example, mobile phone data, satellite imagery, and other sources can actually inform statistics, which is interesting. And we've also seen that during COVID-19 response, mobile phone data was actually used. So this is, speaks to our topic, the need for responsible data sharing, and the need to build actually trust in the Ugandan the Ugandan data ecosystem, if we are to be able to benefit, if Uganda is to be able to benefit from data. So there are some questions in the question and answer, but I think there are some also in the chat. So what I'll do is just to pick a few because of the interest of time. Let's see how many questions we can answer in the remaining around 6 minutes. So there's a question from Johnston Baguma, and it's directed to PDPO. What kind of investments, including partnerships, have you so far made or require in order to address awareness issues of data privacy, of data protection in Uganda? So, Beck, I think I'll just give you like 1 minute to respond to that.
Investments is a tough question. We haven't made investments setting up infrastructure, but I think what you need to know is we've collaborated with many agencies, including Pulse Lab, using Zoom. Then we've also used radio, the traditional means. But even where, let's say, an entity requires us to talk to their staff, we come in and talk to them. So collaboration has been key in driving the message. For local governments, it's something that we are going to definitely explore, starting with the Ministry of Local Government, and also your partners, where you've talked about engaging them. So where you have plans of further engaging them, we can work with you.
Okay. Thanks. Now there is a question here to Catherine from Saturday. It is saying, do they basically, does Safe Border do they explain to Safe Border riders the way their data is collected and how it will be used in an easy and understandable language and accessible on interfaces they use on a daily? I don't know whether Catherine, you can see this question in the chat. Some bits may not be very clear, but I think they are trying to, Saturday is trying to ask whether you explain to the riders themselves how the way their data is collected. And I don't know. Have you seen the question?
Yes, I've seen it, Martin. I think I can speak to it. It probably is coming from the appreciation that riders may not, in some of the riders may not be able to comprehensively read and write. So do we make sure that they do understand the data? By process, at the back end, that a rider has their individual app that is unique and different from what we use for the customers. So in there, they have preview of the privacy policy and what it is all about. Then in their onboarding process, in their training sessions, actually you'll find that these training sessions are conducted in local languages, most of them. So we speak to what the policy is, what's going to happen with the data, why do we collect it, and also speak to them about why the customer data that they have preview to and which one it is and how they need to protect it. So yes, the answer to that would be yes, we try to speak to them on that. Even the service weeks, if we hold them, they will usually be held in the local languages or a mix of both to allow for comprehensive understanding for all.
Okay. Then there is a question from Doreen Gift Bujingo. What can we do to increase the culture of people reading the privacy policies? Because while they are published and accepted before using the applications, most people don't actually read them. Is it possible to make some short second videos about the highlights during the application, maybe because the format they are presented does not encourage reading? So this is quite interesting. So I don't know who will take this. I think Safe Border and maybe we can give this to Nelly for the bank, because banks normally actually give us those long documents to sign, but I think Doreen is pointing out that sometimes these are not read, but people just sign them. Nelly, could you answer this?
Thank you, Martin, and thank you, Doreen, for the question. Indeed, it is a challenge. I think we're in a culture where people are just sign here, sign that, or don't even care. You know, someone wants a service and they're just quick to accept without reading the terms. But in the banking industry, we do have what we call key facts documents and that require that customers are explained to even the terms and conditions and are taken through, not just a matter of saying sign here, sign there. So I want to believe that, and this is something that most institutions will sensitize on periodically. So I want to believe that there's been improvement from as we move from year to year in sensitizing the customers on what is included in those terms and conditions. But I agree that maybe for those that are disclosed on websites, for example, different institutions could could explore some of the options you have provided here, like short videos, etc. That would be something good that can be adopted by each institution on the call. So we'll all explore that and try to ensure that the message goes across without necessarily people just signing on because they're either in a hurry or they have hard press to read. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Nili. I think, guys, we are very grateful to all the panelists for making time to come and talk to us on this important topic, responsible data sharing. And as UN Global Pulse, of course, we are, being part of the UN, we are interested a lot in data reuse for social good. And so we are happy to have these panelists today, dedicate some time to interact with us on this topic. But I would also like to thank the participants. I mean, the questions were still there, but I think we can organize and see how to answer these and maybe post them somewhere on one of the websites and ensure that we have a link sent maybe on Twitter for people to know. But thanks a lot for joining in great numbers. Really excited, and let's continue the discussion around this. As I indicated earlier, the Ministry of ICT and National Guidance, in collaboration with UN Global Pulse, but also closely working with all other stakeholders, are working on a policy instrument that would help Uganda maximize the value of data for socio-economic transformation. And this is in line with recommendations of the National Strategy on the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And so we are excited to continue engaging with you and having more webinars to discuss issues around around this, such that we help Uganda reach at that level of where we have a trusted data ecosystem and also a lot of data sharing, such that we are able to generate value from this data. Like you've heard, the banking sector has a lot of data. I mean, 19 million accounts, that's a lot of data. And then the mobile phone, mobile money accounts, 34 million. So that's a lot of data. And also, you have also heard from Safeborder, they also have a lot of data. So we could, if we could have a way of supporting responsible data sharing, then all this data could actually be used by government, but also by other private sector companies to make informed evidence-based decisions that would help in job creation, innovation and other areas. So as we sign off today, I would like again to thank you for joining, and please remember the data Privacy Day celebration on 31st of January. It's going to be hybrid, and there'll be a link for those of you who will not get invitations to join physically, to join online. And yeah, thanks a lot, and for the country. Thank you. And bye for now.